Hi, I'm Dan Hadaway, and this is CyberViews. Today, I'd like to introduce a colleague who was there when what I long ago started calling the Viso concept was born. You see, as community banking, evolved their information security practices, smaller banks, many who couldn't even afford to have an IT guy fully staffed, were left with a lot of non-technical people holding the information security bag, so to speak. And that's where my friend Jason Mikolanis comes in, because Jason works for a company named Virtual Innovation, a pioneer in the outsourced information security management field. I first met Jason when he rescued a conference I was moderating from a no-show speaker. He and his boss and our executive vice president, Michael Harkey, and me, we all collaborated in about 30 minutes on what ended up being one of the highest rating talks of that conference. And so the first work we did together was very successful. But I didn't really actually get to know Jason until he rescued a bank client of mine from a crisis when their then ISO left them with, as she moved, away to her corporate ladder position, holding that information security bag, not knowing what to do. And so, Mr. Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Dan, for allowing me to be on the podcast. It's quite an honor to talk to you today. I'm looking forward to this. My name is Jason Mikolanis, and I work at Virtual Innovation, an ITIS consulting firm in Northwest Indiana. I personally am the VP of Security Services and head up our information security side of the business. I do a lot of work in the financial sector where they're heavily regulated for obvious reasons. Personally, I'm married to my beautiful wife, Jody, who we just celebrated our 20-year anniversary a few weeks ago. 3 children, my oldest, JJ, my middle son, Ryan, and my baby girl, Addie. All 3 of them are very active in athletics and extracurricular activities. So that's pretty much how I spend all of my personal time away from work.
Well, I tell you, Jason, I've seen you in action in your personal time sometimes. We've been to various conventions and ended up in certain bars and that sort of thing together. And, definitely am very, very impressed and want to congratulate you on your 20th wedding anniversary. That's a heck of a milestone that, that everybody should really celebrate. So congratulations.
Thank you. That's more of a testament to her to putting up with me.
Well, you've met my wife, Stacy, and so we're both the same that way. But, you're an expert in helping banks manage what, is a very convoluted information and cybersecurity process. It's not just that the regulations are so heavy for banks compared to, healthcare and other industries. But it's also because a bank network is a very complicated network to start with. Banks are doing things that most other industries wouldn't even begin to try doing from a risk management perspective. And so how did you first recognize the need for a virtual information security officer services in the community banking sector?
That's a good question. And I could talk for a long time about the history behind it. So I'll try to keep it in the condensed version here. Probably going back 15, 20 years, I've worked for Virtual Innovation, and it started off just supporting customers in the break-fix world, some implementation on some services, and we all have our specialty. So I'm in these banks and we're doing day-to-day stuff, and they start coming to me once a year, every year and a half, saying, hey, we have this audit or exam coming up. We have these request lists. Could you help us with it? So, there's the easy stuff. You could go in and pull your virus definitions and patch reports and other things like that. But then there's the other, what I call the technical, non-technical stuff, where they start talking about business continuity, risk assessments, vendor management, all that stuff. And I saw that as an underserved market. So these groups didn't have somebody that knew how to do this, or they watched a webinar. You guys do a bunch of great ones. So they I know a lot of them would watch those and say, yeah, I watched this and got this template and did this. And for the most part, they were doing stuff pretty well. But what it came down to was, it turned out to be a fire drill every year, is the way I called it. Was I got sick of it, quite frankly, because you would get this request 3 weeks before the audit came or exam started, and now we had to do a year's worth of program development and help them clean up stuff, because let's be honest, their job is to be a banker, not to do this back end stuff. So these banks survive because they're really good bankers and they're really good at what they do. So I started helping them in this fire drill mode for a couple of years and realized, for my sanity and my well-being, I couldn't keep it up, especially when we started doing this more and more. And the one week, I think I had 2 exams and 1 audit. So I probably worked about 80 hours that week. And after coming off of therapy and a little bit of breakdown there, I started realizing we need to start changing this process up a little bit. So I developed a calendar system and, used some logic and said, hey, why don't we do one thing a month? Would be a whole lot easier than doing a whole year's worth in just a couple of weeks. So
much more accurate too, right? I mean, I just can't imagine the stress of trying to pull together all that documentation in a 3-week period of time.
It was MacGyver-esque. It was one of those things where you got it done and it checked the box, but that just doesn't sit with me, and a lot of our folks are like that as well too, where they take pride in what they do. So they wanted not to overkill it, but at the same time, let's take our time and do this right. That was before it was called a VISO, or a virtual information security officer. I mean, the irony of it was, I was at an FSISAC conference probably 8 to 10 years ago, and I'm in this breakout session where a lady was giving us a speech on that. And all of a sudden, I realized, wow, that's what you're doing. So I had to text my boss, Eric. Hey, Eric, do you know I'm a VISO?
Well, and for our audience sake, the FSISAC conference, that's a bank security. I mean, FS is, what is Financial Services Information Security. I forgot what the A and a C stand for, but it's one of the best conferences about bank security that there is. Would you agree with that? I mean, a nationwide.
Oh, absolutely, because it's what the regulators want everybody to be a part of. The bad guys have their dark web. This is the good guys' equivalent of the dark web. That's how they share all their information. So having like-minded people do that, and I know they have them, I think, for the insurance agency. I think they have one for the health agency as well. So these regulated industries having that group, just to bounce, and the local banking groups, the ones that you do so much with, the Indiana bankers and all those. Each state has their own where they can share information and try to stay ahead of the bad guys.
But anyway, I interrupted you. You're at this conference. You're watching this talk. You text your boss, Eric. Hey, I guess I'm called a VISO. I mean, what's changed since those early days? What are the big trends? What's the the landscape of information security? How has it? I mean, when you were at that FSISAC conference, what was that, like 2012, 2013? When did you really start getting into this?
Well, I think we started unofficially doing this in the late 2000s. Again, we were filling a need by helping them with some of this. I think it really started. I'm starting to become an old timer in this industry where, I was working during 9/11 and I was downtown, and I remember driving in that day, and shortly thereafter, you remember this as well too. I know you talk about it. The examinations all of a sudden started focusing on risk, started focusing on business continuity. So that was, and in this industry, for obvious reasons, when things happen, there's a reaction. For every action, there's a reaction. So when the Target breach happened, all of a sudden that started, the hot button was vendor management. Now, what are your secondary vendors doing? What access do these folks have? the pet name 0-day vulnerabilities come out, and all of a sudden they want, what's your patch management? What's your vulnerability management? How are you sending this stuff? So, for me, it was that maturation of what to do. When the FFIEC put that booklet out, and the first time I read it, probably 15, 18 years ago, I don't think anybody really knew what it meant. And to be honest, the examiners didn't. I remember a lot of these guys were, older gentlemen or ladies that were loan off guys that would sit in, it would rotate and say, oh, I did the loan last week. This week I get to do IT. And most of them didn't even know how to spell IT. So it was, you would talk about stuff and tell them our flex capacitors working and transponders this, and they would say, oh, that sounds good. And, I'd joke, but they didn't understand the intricacies of this. And as the regulators started realizing, hey, we got to get better people, and they started getting tougher. And that's a good thing, because they started holding them accountable and really asking the questions, and not, hey, you have a piece of paper that says this, show me this, explain it to me. And a lot of the folks would have that piece of paper, but didn't really understand it. So I started sitting in on a lot of those calls and helping them. And that really cemented, this process for them, because they're like, wow, I need you. You're making me look great. We're getting great feedback for all this stuff. So I tell everybody, my job is to make you look good. Not, I don't care how I look. It's how does the bank look? How does the people look? And if I make them look good, then they continue to work with me.
So, to me, there's been a big change over the years from when you first started offering Viso. And really, I think, where I'm heading with this question is, target. I feel like the target breach is when I noticed this shift in the perception of bank management, up until the target breach, which, what was that, like December of 2013 or whatever. The perception was loan risk is where the risk is in banks. And banks have been through a tough time, especially, in the 2008, Great Recession, that sort of thing. And so I can't blame them for that. But wouldn't you agree the 83 million people that lost their, credit cards temporarily from Target, are, really probably one of the best things that happened, not only to the banking industry, but to commerce in general, because of the fact that it's what really kind of helped management understand that this is a real risk. And so what other kind of changes to the information security landscape have occurred since you first started, realizing I'm a Viso?
It's a good question. And again, I go back to the maturation of the process and understanding it. For a lot of these, if you had a document that said the VCP at the top, that checked the box. But now they're starting to ask, more in-depth questions. They're making sure you understand all your business functions. Are those business functions have a risk weighting to them? And based off of that, are you testing those appropriately? When back in the days, we used to do recovery tests for clients, and the technical side was always phenomenal. We could recover a file and whenever they needed to, whatever their timeframes were, but there was so much missing to it. We saw that, the tabletops weren't there to say, okay, now you have to recover that, but nobody ever thought of, okay, how do you do this manually? What will happen when the system goes down? What can you do via paper? What's the call-in tree like for certain services? We had to do that at one institution, and of the 10 people that were on the call-in list, 2 were still there. I think 3 of them weren't even living it, unfortunately. But it was just eye-opening, because the list hadn't been open in 10 years, and it was a pretty critical process to the bank. And it's something that they needed to look at on a more regular basis. So unfortunately, or fortunately for us in the industry, we preach all this stuff. I know you're an evangelist of all this as well too, but until it really comes out and hits them and they see some financial loss or some risk, and everybody starts scrambling. Then it starts, oh, what are we doing? What are we doing for this? And fortunately, a lot of our folks have been happy because they start asking those questions, and we're able to come back and tell them, well, yeah, that's bad, but we're doing this. And sometimes you need to ratchet some stuff up a little bit. Sometimes you're doing just enough, but it's always an evolving process for sure.
Jason, you've been doing this for so long. We've been doing this for, both of us have been in cybersecurity since a lot of our audience before they were born, right? And so, not all of our audience are bankers, and it just occurs to me that, maybe we ought to kind of drill down on explaining what we mean by the virtual information security officer, position in the first place. I mean, what are the primary benefits that a community-based bank, or a small business for that matter, would get by working with a virtual information security officer, versus just assigning that role to somebody on their, that's already on their team?
Absolutely. Yeah. So banks are required by regulation to have an information security officer to oversee and manage the security of their data. That's the backbone of Graham Leach Bliley, is protecting customer data. So having somebody on staff to do that could be troubling for small institutions, because my smallest bank that I work with has approximately 8 people. So that includes tellers, presidents, loan officers. So we all know everybody in the community banks. You've said it so many times, they're superheroes because they wear so many hats. They have so many job functions. So a lot of times the CFO is now the information security officer. Great at what he or she does in that role, but not so much in the information security world. So that's where we come in. We like to be able to offer them that high-level service of a big bank and somebody with experience that could navigate the waters for them and let them know. So there's a lot of things involved in information security. You have to do risk assessments to understand where your risk is. You have to have a business continuity plan to understand how to recover from those risks and data. You have an incident response plan so that if something bad happens, how do you alert customers? How do you prevent it from going any further? You have vendor management to look at your vendors to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. On top of that, there's the whole information security world where all these security systems, your SIEM, your antivirus, your patch management, your vulnerabilities, that could be daunting. And when you read a lot of these articles or attend webinars, a lot of these people are selling stuff. So they'll say, this is sky's falling. So somebody will watch a webinar and call me up in a panic. I just saw this. We have to do this. We have to do this. I give them that perspective, right? So for the non-regulated entities, having a quote ISO or virtual ISO, I don't know if that's necessarily a requirement, but there's a lot of aspects that falls in there, because if you think about it, small businesses rely on customer relationships and trust. And if that trust is broken because they lose some data, somebody hacks their systems, somebody ransomwares them, and now all of a sudden their systems are locked down and they can't do what they need to do, they can't do their business, right? If you're a printing company and you have one printer and that printer goes down, what's your business continuity plan? You can't work. And the 5 or 6 employees you have can't work either. So you get a second one. You risk assess where your dangers are. Do we need to have locks on this? Do we have to have these security controls? So it's similar to a tax accountant. A lot of the small companies don't have tax accountants on their staff. Why? Because they only need them for a month a year. And somebody like me that has the experience in this world really doesn't need to be there full time. So if you work with somebody internally and say, you're our on-site guy, we're going to train you to a certain level. Here's what you need to do and look out of. Anything that looks suspicious, let me know. And I'll help them with all the other tasks and processes that are involved in that information security world.
that I feel like the tax accountant, as I was listening to you, I was trying to think of a good analogy, and really I came up with a different one, but very, very similar. It's, Infotex was born out of an accounting firm, right? We bought out the CPA partners in 2012, but for the first 12 years of our history, we got to see, in the accounting firm, a lot of small businesses making the decision that, hey, they certainly weren't required by any regulations to have a controller in their business. But they couldn't afford to have a full-time controller. And so they would outsource that function to the CPAs at the accounting firm who, not only were trained on the tax aspects of things, but also on what it took to not only get the books correct, but to understand the meaning of the numbers, right? And I feel like that's kind of very similar to what you're offering, is that, forget the banks and the regulated industries. If you're a small business, and there's many different VISO firms out there, I want to say, just by way of making sure that, this is a podcast, not a marketing cast, right? But suffice it to say, I can see this type of business being around 100 years from now, just like, the CPA business has lasted well over 100 years, even though how many times have people predicted technology replacing CPA? Now Chat GPT is going to write our tax return for us now, right? But it's interpreting right. Let's say somebody had the money to implement every single line of the regulation. Would they want to?
I would say no. I wouldn't let them. I think there's scale in everything, right? If you could put, and I say this all the time, you could spend $1 million on technology, but if your users have their passwords written down, or have MFA fatigue and click a button and allow a bad guy to get in, it bypasses all those security controls. And now your $1 million security system is allowing them to do whatever they're doing because they have the keys to the kingdom. So it's about scale. My favorite word in the regulations now is size and complexity, because based on their size and complexity, that's where I think I add the most value is, let's scale that. Do you need this $30,000 a month risk assessment system? No, but you do need a system. It's finding to what scale and what makes sense for them, obviously.
Taking this back to, the dawn, of the virtual information security officer concept, that what I started calling VISO, and like every, buzzword that I come up with, because there isn't a buzzword, by the time everybody else is using the concept, it's now really called, isn't it, a virtual CISO, or a virtual, chief information security officer, that they also ran, so to speak. You guys are pioneers in the field, but you're focusing on community-based banks. But isn't there like a kind of a cottage industry now cropping up of a lot of different MSPs and other types of organizations training themselves up in offering, virtual CISO, capabilities to larger businesses? Are you seeing a lot of that at all? Or?
Yeah, I think, in our market space, the good thing is being small community banks, it's profitable, but it's not a cottage industry. You don't have the large multinational bank. We don't go after the large multinational banks because they already have people to do this, and the level of expertise that they need for that is very specialized. So yes, there's a market for that stuff, but where I think we hang our hat, and our mantra too is being a valued vendor for these folks. I've worked with Eric, our president, since 2001. Our core group of guys have been there with me for about the same. So we're not going anywhere. We're together. We're basically a family, and as we add people, that family grows. But what I always talk about is we're here, we're not going anywhere. In those scenarios where they bring in, train people up, those people are revolving door a lot of times too. So yeah, that's great. You have somebody come in, they have a quote system. You get plugged in there, and every couple of years somebody comes in and out. And I started this, and I'm still doing it. We're adding folks. I don't want to break any news, but we are expanding. We are bringing people on to help me and my practice here, along with my associate Jay. We do a lot of the work ourselves. So as we add customers, we want to make sure we have capacity and the right people to go all around. So we are making sure that, again, we streamline our processes, but it's the people, not the program, right? It's knowing their business. It's not just saying, well, this is what you do, and we customize this there. I like to go in and say, hey, somebody's put in a lot of work on a lot of these systems. So you have a really good system. Maybe we just tweak it. So, some folks will come in with the blank template and make everything work. A lot of times we make their stuff work because it's already 90% there. And I don't want to come in and reinvent the wheel for something that's already working.
Well, and like I said, I got to know you because we called you in to rescue a bank that had just lost their ISO to that, and I really can't, the bank isn't very happy with that person still, right? Because they trained her up, they spent a lot of money, they got, her the certifications that she wanted to get, and then she used those to get a job somewhere else. But that's, I feel like, one of the big advantages. And by the way, a line of questions I was going to ask, but I'm looking at the time, and I don't think I need to, because I'm getting the impression that this is one of those services where it's not like you had to go out and convince people to do it. It's they're calling you up saying, we need help. And you're saying, well, we actually have this concept we can utilize where we act as your information security officer. And am I stating that correctly?
Absolutely. And going back to the bank that you were talking about, still spend a lot of time there working with the group there, and some of my favorite people. I enjoy every second I spend there. So I greatly appreciate that. That's the good part about it too, is not only do you get to help them, but you get to meet some great people as well. But yeah, that's absolutely. It is.
Can you share some success stories or, specific examples of how your services have helped community banks?
Well, the good and bad of it is sometimes you get brought in an emergency. We had one bank that hired a IT firm to come in and do their work. Well, let me take that a step further back. Before I came in a few years prior, they had an audit firm come in and write up like a 30-page audit. They just absolutely destroyed them. Oh. Well, their philosophy was they come in and destroy you, and then they turn around and say, well, we don't want to be your auditor anymore. We want to fix everything for you. So they came in and they fixed everything. Well, large bill for that. And then they go away. So now the bank, thinking everything's great, a year and a half later, they're in a bad situation. So they hire an IT firm to come in, and the IT firm's like, well, yeah, we'll do your IT, but we don't know this. So that's when I got brought in. After a couple audits and exams, they got hit pretty hard and pretty desperate. I'm like, man, we just need to do this. We're a small institution. We can't, there's not a lot of money to throw at this. We can't keep doing this. How do we do this? Well, that was a success story to me, as we came in and tightened everything up. We built their program based on their size and complexity, got a good system going. The gentleman I worked with there started to learn and understand some of this stuff, started taking ownership on some of it. When he got busy, he would just call me up and say, hey, Jason, I need you to take care of that, which we would. But I think that's pretty much all of them are pretty much the same story, with some exceptions. I mean, there were some groups that we do IT work for a number of years. And they came in and just said, hey, we've heard you talk at conferences. We know you do all this stuff. we want to bring you in and see how you help. Well, I get in there and I'm floored because they're acing audits. These people are just phenomenal, just killing it. And I'm like, what do you need me for? You know, those are the people that get it. And I almost want to switch and put my money in that bank because, you know, they're understanding how to do it right, because it's not about the ego. It's not about anything there. And they know that we're not going to come in and say, all right, now I'm in this situation, I'm going to bill you for 30 hours a month. It's about tightening the screws. I tell my kids this all the time. They'll play a game and, you know, go 3 for 4, but I'll say, yeah, that one time you dropped your shoulder on the swing, you just got to tighten the screws just a little bit on things, you know. And that's the right way to look at it. It's not, hey, come in and save me in the fire drill mode. I'll help them. But you know, when you come into those situations, it's a lot easier and more fun for sure.
Well, and I mean, I'll say, you know, I've seen this work, you know, not only with virtual innovation, with a lot of different, you know, it's the concept that works because, and don't get me wrong, you guys are amazing at it. You've done a really good job. And that bank that you were first, you know, got to know you, Jason, they were in great shape. They were getting good audits. They, you know, they have gotten a 1 on their examination, which is like unheard of, right? But they are out in front of things. They were wise enough to realize, and they wanted me to be the Viso. And I'm like, I don't have good bedside manners, you know what I mean? And you guys just came in there and you knocked their socks off in terms of maybe making them, you know, to stay at that level. So I really appreciate your time, as busy as you are. I just kind of have to ask one last question here is, you know, what kind of a toll does that take on you personally, though? One of the things I always, you know, rude about auditing is that you don't get to become one with the system. And I can see that being even tougher as a virtual ISO, where you have to leave and you're hoping that everybody understood what you meant. But I mean, how does that work when you're doing that for many different companies at one time?
That's a really good point. Yeah, I tell my kids this all the time too. You do your best and that's all you could do, right?
Yeah.
As I mentioned, we've been with a lot of these folks for a long time. A lot of these are, you know, Virtual Innovations has been working for about 12, 13 years now. We have clients that go back 20 plus years, which doesn't make sense. But in our previous life, we were another consulting firm. We joined another organization, and then Eric started another one in the 2010 range. So there's those relationships, you know, we know these people, we know, you know, so I take everything very personally. We want to make sure that they do well because, you know, they have families. When Eric started his new company, I went to work for a multi-bank holding company in the Chicago area. Phenomenal experience. I wanted to run my own show. So I was the director of IT there. And, you know, it's one of those things where I started to get the bug to come back because it's sort of like teaching. You like helping other people, and you realize I would rather be doing this. I'm not a big fan of sitting at a desk doing stuff, right? I'm my ADD wants to always be doing something. So I love this because there's always something going on. You know, when you have an audit, it's kind of like a big game. So you get jacked up for it. And it's kind of an adrenaline rush for me in a sad way. But yeah, it's you go into these places, and to answer your question again, you do your best. You hope that you speak in a way that understands. I always tell everybody, I try to explain this like I do to my mother. God bless her. She's going to be 85 this year. Trying to get her to understand stuff because she's a very non-technical person, very smart, great businesswoman, worked at a bank. So she knows all this stuff. So I try to explain this to them like I'm talking to her when she asks me, what do I do? What is this story about, or whatever. So if I could convince my mom and get her to understand it, I could get anybody. So it's just a little secret of the trade for me.
Well, I really appreciate the fact that you're taking time to spend with us here today in our podcast, Jason. I will have to say that, it totally resonates with me what you're saying about the being able to work with many different organizations. When I was at that accounting firm, that one of the CPAs there went into industry for a while, and on his way out, I kind of gravitated to him because he loved what he was doing. You could tell he just loved being a CPA. And so on the way out the door into industry, it was like, I want to become one with the system. That was why, because I was like, why are you leaving the accounting firm? You're going to go work for it. He wanted to make sure he'd never been able to see everything. He'd always give advice and wondered what happened with it. Right. Well, then about 2-3 years later, he's rejoining the firm. And what he said is very, very similar to what you just got done saying, which is, he really felt like, I think the way he put it was, at that company is really neat. I did get to see everything through the nth detail, but I only got to show people how to do stuff once. And that's what he missed about, being in the public accounting arena, is what he called it, is that, he was able to show a business after a business after business, things that he liked watching their thinking cap come on it. Oh, I get it now. You got a kick out of people understanding, stuff like debt to equity ratios as an example. So I can definitely relate to what you're saying there. I again, thank you. We really appreciate the insights and the ideas that you've shared with us today. I think that those who listen to CyberViews will, enjoy your contributions. I'm Dan Hadaway.
And I'm Jason Mikolanis.
And this has been a CyberViews podcast presented by Infotechs. And never forget, awareness is 9/11s of the battle.